Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We are back for yet another edition of our new series, Alabama Football's Best 15 Games of the 21st Century. We're counting down from 15 to 1. We have done several of these already. We're having a lot of fun doing it. I hope you are too as you're watching along. So far, we've done LSU 2014, Florida 2020, Texas A&M 2013. You can go back and listen to those episodes. You should. In fact, go do that before you start this one. And then you'll come back and we'll be ready to go. Today is number 12. And our pick for the 12th best Alabama football game from the 21st century is Alabama versus Notre Dame in Miami for the BCS championship game in January 2013 for the 2012 season. And helping me to do this, as usual, is Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalisi. Matt, thank you for coming back again. This one is special for many reasons, but you were actually in Miami to watch this live, weren't you?
I was at this game. This was early on for me at AL.com, and I actually had driven to Miami to cover this game after having covered the Under Armour All-American game, which was in Tampa. So I drove directly through the Everglades to get to this game. Not advisable to anyone who's thinking about doing that.
I was not there for this one. Didn't have to cover it. I was just watching from afar. Was at AL.com at this point. But yeah, I mean, this was a big one. I mean, just strictly because of the history, I think, of Alabama and Notre Dame. You've got arguably the two best college football programs of all time finally lining back up across from each other on the field and on the biggest stage, the national championship down there in Miami. And it was just poised to be a classic matchup. Notre Dame was a team of destiny. We'll get into that in just a little bit of this theme that we heard during the 2012 season. It was a magical run for them, to say the least. But I want us to run through categories as we usually do on this show, and we talk about what we loved about the game, what we remember about the game, the best plays, the best moments, much more. Matt, I think the first thing we need to do is maybe explain to people why this game is so low on our list for the 15 best games of the 21st century, because I think a lot of Alabama fans, they're going to say this is number one for them for many reasons, but here it is. It's number 12 for us. Why do you think this is a fair ranking?
I mean, I think it has to do with the competitiveness of the game primarily. I mean, this obviously was a big moment for Alabama football. It was their third national championship in a very short span of time. I mean, it was the third in 5 years, and it was, well, third in 4 years, I guess, actually. But I mean, I can remember, I think, considering and discussing the consequences of this game before it happened and definitely after it. And I've mentioned it on this show before. It really felt like this one felt totally undeniable that we were in the midst of the greatest stretch of all time for a college football program. Nobody had ever done anything like this before. And certainly they did so in an emphatically dominant way. They beat the only other team that anybody had any claim to maybe being the best team in college football that year. And as we'll discuss in this, it was never close, not for a second of this game.
Yeah, an undefeated Notre Dame team. And look, Notre Dame is one of those teams like Alabama, like USC, like Florida, like these blue bloods who, when they're good, it's good for college football, right? It's just good for the brand and it's good for television. People are going to be tuning in. The interest is going to be really high. And so when you have, again, these two powerhouses playing against each other on this stage, it's just as good as it gets for a lot of reason. Matt, I mean, let's continue to do our best to set the table here. The year was technically 2013, right? It's early 2013, but the final game of the 2012 season. When I say 2012 Alabama football team, what springs to mind first for you?
Well, I mean, I think I definitely think about that offensive line and generally I would say the run game. This was the peak of joyless murder ball Alabama. I mean, this was they loved to beat people by simply physically overwhelming you, and not many teams could stop it. And when they could, Alabama had enough of a vertical threat. And I'm saying it like they barely had one. They had a dangerous vertical passing game too, and having it is part of what made the run game so successful, and vice versa. I mean, essentially, when teams would start to sell out to stop Eddie Lacy and TJ Yeldon, Alabama had enough weapons that they could make you pay for it, and they do it in this game. They did it against LSU earlier in the season, a very dramatic win for Alabama. They end up doing it against Georgia various times in that game. That you can see Georgia trying to adjust to what Alabama's doing offensively, and Alabama's just always got something else up their sleeve that you can't stop. This was a very, as Saban would like to put it, this was a very multiple offense. They had a lot of different weapons, and they kind of all get used in this game too. A lot of names touch the ball in this game.
Yeah, I always loved when he said multiple the way he did,
Yeah.
like, because early on I had no idea what he was talking about, and he'd say things like, "You got to get a hat on a hat." And it's just like, what is that? Like, I'd love just like the Nick Saban glossary
Yeah.
explained by him. But yeah, like in my notes here at the top, I have the true advent and peak of joyless murder ball. You said it right. Like, this to me was what Nick Saban was explaining and helping us picture during his introductory press conference when he became the head coach at Alabama, where he said, "This is the type of team that I want to, the type of program that I want to build, where we have bigger, stronger, faster guys that the other team hates to play." And no team during the Saban era embodied that, personified that better than the 2012 team. And this is a team that even lost a game during the regular season to Texas A&M. We covered a lot of that in the last episode when they had the rematch against Johnny Manziel, but it's just hard to believe that they had any sort of weakness whatsoever, because as we'll discuss here, this night in Miami, they showed no signs of that. And the next part of this, Matt, in terms of table setting, I want to get to Notre Dame, because going into this game, Alabama obviously had a complicated history with Notre Dame. What was your impression of the school and the football team, Notre Dame, just circa 2012 and during your upbringing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I went to a Catholic high school, so you get a lot of Notre Dame pushed on you whether you like it or not in that setting. I will say for sure, I having grown up in Alabama, I think I always sensed some of the enmity between those two programs. I think I knew that it was a little bit of a thorn in Alabama's side, because it was one of the rare teams that Bear Bryant never had a win over. And I think, also in the case of this particular team, Notre Dame had a little bit of the reputation that I would maybe say for people thinking about it today. When you hear about the Dallas Cowboys constantly being talked about on ESPN, right? And you wonder, why are they always talking about this team? Because they haven't done anything in a long time. That was Notre Dame, I think, in 2012. They were constantly being discussed in college football media, but they had not accomplished anything in well over 2 decades, I would say. They just weren't nationally relevant, and the media wanted them to be so badly because they're this huge national brand. And so the second they had a worthy team, a good team, it's all you could hear about. I mean, the only thing that got discussed more than Notre Dame this season in 2012 was maybe Johnny Manziel. And in my opinion, Manziel earned all of that hype. I think Notre Dame, if you go, we don't need to dig into their whole schedule, but Notre Dame also has the
No, we
benefit
will.
of they 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 played USC. Props to them back when USC was still kind of good, and they played Michigan. Alabama also played Michigan in 2012, by the way. It was not an overwhelmingly difficult schedule. They did not have to go through the gauntlet of, say, an SEC championship game against a top 5 Georgia the way that Alabama did in order to get to this point.
This is when the SEC was peaking.
Absolutely. I mean, they were
Yeah.
on a run of winning consecutive national championships, going all the way back to 2007, I believe, was when the streak started.
Yeah, it was going on for a while. And, you know, Notre Dame, just as a frame of reference, you grew up hearing the name of the school, even if you didn't really see the product on the field that your parents and grandparents and relatives and friends were talking about, because they grew up in an era when Notre Dame was a dominant program. And for us, again, like what we knew was Rudy, right? Like in 1993, there was like the movie Rudy, and we knew who Lou Holtz was, and we knew who Ara Parsegian was, just because, you know, it's just part of the college football history that Alabama fans who are so accustomed to the sport grew up hearing about. You know, we knew about the Cornelius Bennett hit. You know, that was probably it. But a lot of us in our lifetime had never really had a proper Alabama Notre Dame game that we had watched. And, you know, in terms of table setting, like one of the biggest stars of this whole saga and the season really was Manti Te'o, the Notre
Absolutely.
Dame linebacker. I mean, he was a major star of the entire season. And look, he was a really talented player, super productive. He's the heart of this solid Notre Dame defense and team. He was a Heisman finalist. I mean, he won every other award, Matt. He won the Butkus Award, the Lott, the
A
Bednarik, the
long
Nagurski,
list.
the Lombardi, the Maxwell, the Walter Camp. He was a unanimous All-American. He was an awesome player. And more than anything, he was a household name. And it seems a little unfair now to him, for obvious reasons, that, you know, the thing that most people remember about him was this catfishing scandal, right? And, you know, that's all chronicled in a Netflix documentary if you want to go watch it or look up the Wikipedia page. But Matt, you've actually interviewed Manti Te'o before, if I'm not mistaken. What do you remember about him and around this game, and what was he like to talk to?
Well, I did talk to him at the time too, because we had, of course, a media day before the national championship game. And I mean, he's an impressive guy. I think he was a little sort of subdued, and I thought that about the whole Notre Dame team when we were there. There was not a lot of trash talking. I would say they didn't come off as overconfident coming into the game. But yes, I also interviewed him when the documentary came out a couple of years ago. You know, it's hard to know what parts of it are sort of revisionist history, right, in your own mind, because you look back at something and you tell yourself that it was affecting you, when I don't know if that's maybe what he would have said at the time. The news of that situation actually came out after the national championship game, but Te'o says that he had sort of figured out what was going on before the game, and that it was in his head, and that he was definitely not himself. And look, I think it's believable in as much as you'll if you watch the full broadcast of this game, you will hear quite often from Kirk Herbstreit that Manti Te'o is not having a good game and he is not playing like his normal self. Now, who there's no way we could know how much of that was what he was going through versus the fact that he was going up against one of the greatest college football teams of all time.
Yeah, and we should also note that this is Brian Kelly is the head coach of Notre Dame, and Brian Kelly is now at LSU. He jumped Notre Dame to come to the SEC, where he's just in the midst of a hotbed of talent in Baton Rouge. And you know, credit to him that he made Notre Dame relevant again on the national level, and he got them to the BCS championship. He got them to the college football playoff numerous times. So Brian Kelly, his football coaching acumen is not in question, but he's an interesting character in this saga. We're going to hear from him and talk about him a little bit later. But Matt, let's hit the opening drive here. We want to just continue to kind of contextualize the game, what was happening at that point in the season, state of the program, and then talk about a few more things that happened as the game was happening, because this was an amazing game if you're an Alabama fan, right? But there were other things that happened throughout, and there were other like little subplots. One that that fans in the nation and I certainly find hilarious and want to talk about here soon. But Alabama are the defending national champs. They beat LSU in the BCS game the year before in a rematch of the game of the century. This is Nick Saban's sixth season as the head coach. This is his third of his six national championships at Alabama. They return A.J. McCarron as starting quarterback. He's in his second year in that role, and he's really kind of emerging as sort of like a much more than a game manager, and even becoming kind of a Tide legend, certainly by the end of this game. Trent Richardson is gone. Eddie Lacy steps up as the guy in this run-heavy, balanced attack. Doug Nussmeier is there in his first season as the offensive coordinator after Jim McElwain left. Kirby Smart is there in his fifth season as the DC. And Matt, I want to ask you about this. Alabama is just on a recruiting tear at this point. And part of that 2012 class that year, guys like Landon Collins and Cyrus Jones and Reggie Ragland and Kenyon Drake, Alphonse Taylor. And then you also had these guys who would contribute right away, like Amari Cooper and TJ Yeldon. Matt, as somebody who used to cover recruiting for a living, like how would you describe the machine Nick Saban and his staff had in place at this point?
Yeah, they were totally unstoppable at this point. I mean, they were number one class after number one class, just stacking them. And I would say 2012 in particular is an interesting moment for them in recruiting because there wasn't they this was one of the rare windows where they didn't really even have a competitor in the area for their talent. And I mean, there have been throughout uh, the Saban era programs that sort of stepped up and liked to challenge Alabama on the recruiting trail a lot. Auburn has had a few eras of that, but this is coming really kind of after Gene Chiswick's staff was doing their most effective recruiting. The 2012 season was a disaster for them, and they had that their recruiting efforts had really sort of fallen apart because of that. But make no mistake, they had been really competitive with Alabama up to that point. Georgia, of course, didn't really. I mean, Kirby Smart was not there yet. They had not turned into the sort of Titan. And under Mark Richt, they were not a recruiting juggernaut on the same level that they are now. Urban Meyer in Florida, they just weren't really recruiting the same types of players as Alabama. Probably LSU was as close as you could get, and Nick Saban owned Louisiana during this time at Alabama. He could take whoever he wanted out of there, and he did. I mean, you talked about Landon Collins, you mentioned him. Eddie Lacy's another one he stole right out from under LSU. So this is a team that has a lot of studs in the lineup that come from the state of Alabama because they were able to dominate in the home state, but also in Georgia and also Louisiana. And of course, they're starting to get guys from all over the place too. This is I would say on the upswing of Alabama becoming a national recruiting power.
Well put, Matt. I mean, and this is a game too where you see the importance of that level of recruiting and the talent gap between the elite and the super ultra elite. And so we'll get into it, but it's January 7th, 2013. It's at Sun Life Stadium in Miami Gardens, Florida. ESPN broadcasts the game. On the call are Brent Musburger, remember that name, and Kirk Herbstreit in the booth, and Tom Rinaldi and Heather Cox are on the sideline. And Alabama gets the ball first, and it's just a steady diet of Eddie Lacy play action passing, capped off with a 20-yard Lacy touchdown run. And Matt, they just run right through Notre Dame on this first drive, 82 yards in just 5 plays, and they set what appears to be a pretty dominant tone.
Yeah, it is breathtaking to see this opening drive from Alabama. And really, I would say the entire sort of opening half of this game, nothing goes right for Notre Dame. Everything goes right for Alabama. And it's you can feel the wind go out of their sails so quickly. And I mean, for some more context, one of the things that I remember the most about this game is this is the most excitement I can remember seeing from an opposing fan base going into a game against Alabama. I mean, the Notre Dame fans were absolutely jubilant. It was a celebration before this game in the parking lot of that stadium in Miami. they could not. I mean, some of it was like, I can't believe we're here, we're back, but it really did feel celebratory. And I mean, there were a lot of celebrity fans there. I remember seeing Vince Vaughn walking out on the field at the start of the game, who's apparently a Notre Dame fan.
Yeah.
But
In Rudy, he's in the movie Rudy.
that's right, that's right. But yeah, Regis Philbin was there, I want to say. But like, generally, that was the vibe. I mean, the Notre Dame fans were so excited, and you can still feel them hanging on to it as this first half plays out, in the form of, I think, booing what they believe to be bad calls by the officials. A lot of that, in like very vigorously, but like, you'll hear, if you watch the broadcast, you will hear the rules official pretty much every time come on and say they got it right, the call was correct. And even if they didn't, I think it starts to become apparent as you get into the second quarter that, like, this ain't the officials handing the game to Alabama. This is, Alabama has such a distinct advantage in every arena here that Notre Dame is not going to be able to hang. And they, we'll talk about this later, but like, they don't seem to have had a plan that took into account that they had a talent disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll just say it that way.
But you've seen that against Nick Saban teams like later in his career, right? Where scheme is really what gives them the most trouble. And it only gets worse for Notre Dame. I mean, they're awful on offense in the first half. Here are all of their offensive possessions during the first two quarters: punt, turnover on downs, punt, and punt. It's 28-0 with touchdowns from tight end Michael Williams, TJ Yeldon, another by Eddie Lacy. So Notre Dame is down 4 touchdowns. I mean, the gulf between these two teams is just seemingly infinite.
And
go ahead.
Well, I want to say, like, I mean, really, and the run game is the story in the first half.
Yeah.
Almost entirely. I mean, that first drive is just all run, and a pretty good mix of Eddie Lacy and TJ Yeldon. Yeldon actually had more carries in this game, but Eddie Lacy ends up with more yards. But even that Michael Williams touchdown, the second touchdown in the game that you mentioned, it's really happens entirely based on the run. Alabama had once again just hammered the ball down the field, right down Notre Dame's throat. And they get up to the goal line. They put in that goal line package. They have Jesse Williams in as the fullback. And Notre Dame is at this point so demoralized, so terrified of that run that, I mean, AJ just sort of flips the ball over the line to Michael Williams in the end zone. And it's so apparent that run game is in Notre Dame's head, and they can throw everything they want at it, and all that's going to do is make them more vulnerable to this offense.
Well, you talked about that offensive line, but maybe Alabama's best offensive line ever. You had DJ Fluker and Chance Warmack, Barrett Jones, I believe Anthony Steen and Cyrus Kwanjo, just a murderer's row
Great
of
lineup,
guys.
yeah.
Oh man, just dominating. And then you had just a bowling ball that was Eddie Lacy. You had this 5-star phenom in TJ Yeldon. So one of the big, we get to halftime, Matt. One of the biggest highlights of the entire night is the Brian Kelly halftime interview
that we really have grown accustomed to seeing all season. Where do the fixes need to come in the second half?
Maybe Alabama doesn't come back in the second half. It's all Alabama. I mean, we can't tackle them right now, and who knows why? They're big and physical. I guess I do know why. It's just that our guys have not tackled the way they have all year. And then we've got to get off press and man coverage. We haven't been able to do that. So credit Alabama. They played a great first half. We got to go in there and we got to get after it and play with some pride in the second half and try to get this thing closer so we can try to find a way to win.
Coach, we'll let you get to your guys. Thank you. Brent?
All right, Heather, thank you. For Bama, 309
I gotta say,
yards of off.
Emotionally, Brian Kelly is already on the bus.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, you can get after it all you want in the second half. I mean, it's just going to get even worse. Like, the harder you try, even seemingly, it's almost like you want it to get to garbage time. So Alabama will let up a little bit, because if it's competitive, that means you're going to get their best, and you're just going to keep getting smashed by them. And credit to Brian Kelly, though, for having the emotional maturity to diagnose what was actually happening and just understand that it's over for us.
I do think I will actually sort of come to the Notre Dame players' defense here by saying, if your coach is basically saying we ain't got the guys to win this game, then that means it was actually your job, coach, to come up with a plan to help us win this game. And I just don't. I mean, when I watch this first half, it's so baffling to me to see them trot Everett Golson, this quarterback, who obviously, look, you don't really hear his name a lot today. Everett Golson didn't have a huge career after this, but they're just sort of putting it all on him. They only carry the ball 10 times with their running back. That's not even trying to take any of the pressure off of your quarterback. And they had a decent running back, but I mean, it's pretty clear they looked at the situation and said, we're not going to win running the ball. But I think you have to commit to that to some degree to take some of the pressure off of Everett Golson. And, he's just not able to get anything going. He's 21 of 36, which is a respectable completion percentage considering what he's playing against. But, 270 yards, a touchdown, an interception by HaHa Clinton Dix, who is very young still at this point, and I think is very clearly already looking like a future dominant safety in this game. But I think it was a tough assignment. I don't know that there's a lot of scenarios in which Notre Dame could have made this competitive, but I just didn't see any fire or any want to out of Brian Kelly's game plan in this. He kind of just keeps sending his guys out there and says, chuck it down the field and maybe our receiver will beat their DB,
Yeah. I mean, look, this was a moment of realization, a moment of clarity, as Jules says in Pulp Fiction, right? For Brian Kelly and maybe a lot of other college football coaches. Alabama is just on a different level completely. And the contrast between what was on the surface what on the surface appeared to be two elite programs is wild. That contrast. I mean, it's clear that there are even levels to elite. So it was amazing. But look, before we get to the second half, Matt, during the first quarter with 4.5 minutes to go, Alabama's up 14-0. The ESPN cameras cut to Catherine Webb, AJ McCarron's then girlfriend at the time, and ESPN announcer Brent Musburger begins, let's say, editorializing a little bit. Matt, let's hear a little bit from Brent.
When you're a quarterback at Alabama, you see that lovely lady there. She does go to Auburn, I want to admit that. But she also, this Alabama, and that's A.J. McCarron's girlfriend, okay? And right there on the right is Dee Dee Bonner. That's A.J.'s mom. Wow, I'm telling you, quarterbacks, you get all the good-looking women. What a beautiful woman.
Wow, A.J.'s doing some things right down the
So if you're a youngster in Alabama, start getting the football out and throw it around the backyard with Pop.
All right. For Brent's sake, yeah. Let's just. Matt,
the
you were
thirstiest an announcer has ever been in a football broadcast.
Well, not his first time, I don't think, to do something like this. And listen, Brent Musburger is one of the all-time great football play-by-play guys, and he called a great game. But it was just unbelievable when it happened. Matt, you were at the game, so you didn't hear it live.
No, but I actually did become so. This was in the era when Twitter existed already, and I became aware that this was becoming a thing because we saw a lot of people, and Ben too, for let people peek behind the curtain. Journalists who are covering a game, we're all talking to each other, but also we're talking to sort of like the newsroom back at home base as the game is going on, and everybody's sort of letting us know that this is becoming a big part of the broadcast. And I actually got sort of like sent out into the stadium to try and find her during the game. And I didn't get like an interview or anything, but I did end up handing her one of the newspapers that you often see the players holding up after the game was over. I found her and gave her a copy of the stunt newspaper that's that we give out when the team wins.
Amazing, man. A brush with history, Matt. I mean, what amazing here too, though, that did you know Conan O'Brien did a bit about this?
I did not. I don't think I've ever seen it.
you got to look it up on his TBS show, Conan. Writer and performer Brian Stack plays the voice of Musburger, and he calls into Conan's show to apologize for his behavior. And it's like Conan's talking on a telephone, and you hear his voice, and he says, "Hey, while I'm on, let me take a look at your audience." then he proceeds to say inappropriate things about like the various men and women in the crowd.
My God.
And it turns out that he's calling from the rafters of the studio while naked. So they did this a couple of times. It was incredible. But listen, ESPN, to put this behind us, ESPN apologized for Musburger's comments the next day. But Catherine Webb insisted at the time that it didn't bother her at all. Musburger in 2022, he commented on the moment when he was on what's called the Shamrock podcast. He said, quote, "Coach Kelly, who I know very well, now down at LSU, having left Notre Dame, I still tease him when he got blown out by Alabama in the national championship game. I took all the heat off him because I called the beauty queen beautiful. I was the villain that night in the eyes of the media, especially the woke journalists in some of the papers around the country." So we'll talk a little bit more
ridiculous
about Brent's moment during this game, but it was just hilariously entertaining, and we'll talk a little bit more too about Catherine Webb and sort of like where that went. But Matt, second half doesn't get much better for Notre Dame. They put together a short drive. They get a couple of first downs even, but they throw, like you said, the interception to Clinton Dix. Alabama gets the ball back, and A.J. McCarron leads a 97-yard drive that ends up with a 34-yard touchdown pass to Amari Cooper. They go up 35-0. So look, Matt, I don't think that it's really worth taking people through the rest of it play by play here. Alabama wins the game 42-14. They outgain Notre Dame 529-302. A.J. McCarron finishes the game with 20 of 28 passing for 264 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Eddie Lacy has 20 carries for 140 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, another receiving. Amari Cooper has 6 catches for 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. Matt, it's a bludgeoning. This is a bludgeoning of a game.
One of the most dominant wins, certainly in a high stakes situation, that we ever saw from Alabama during its peak era with Saban. I mean, the stakes, I really think this game did a lot to cement Alabama's reputation as a program for the decade that followed, basically, of people almost, it's almost like it gave them a sort of permanent benefit of the doubt that, and I know I sound like an Auburn fan here at this point, but like, I do really think that after this game, there was almost always an assumption that if there was a big game happening and Alabama was involved, the assumption is Alabama's going to win. And I mean, look, more often than not, that was certainly a correct assumption, but like, it's why anytime they lost after this was such a huge event and such a shocker, because people all watched this happen. And I think it sort of burned into their brains that Alabama is impossible to beat. They are Goliath. They are the unbeatable force in this sport, like we've never seen before in this sport. And I mean, it's momentous for that reason alone, I think, is because it everyone was watching and nobody forgot about this.
The benefit of the doubt point is great because this game and LSU before that, really in 2011, this is why during these college football playoff arguments, who's in, who's out, if Alabama's sort of like on the outside looking in, and the BCS conversation too, at that point, this is why Alabama would often be included in the end in the voters, and whoever was making the final decisions, they would include Alabama because you had these situations in 2011 and 2012 and in 2017 later on where Alabama would lose a game, often barely lose a game. But if they got that second chance, they got in the national championship, they would win it, and they would win it convincingly, thus proving that Alabama belonged in that game. So, and that's why they would continue to get the benefit of the doubt until Nick Saban was finished coaching there, and they kind of get it now. I mean, there was a 3-loss team last year. There was conversation about putting them in a 12-team playoff. So
yeah. I mean, look, that's the thing you have to enjoy as an Alabama fan is everyone who
enjoy it.
Yeah,
they do enjoy it.
But I mean, everyone who says all these other fans and media members and whatever who say everybody's biased towards Alabama. They always assume Alabama is better than they are. Yeah, that's true, and that's awesome if you're an Alabama fan. And it happened because of this stretch of time. It happened because everyone watched Alabama lay waste to the sport. No one realistically could challenge them in a high stakes game. And this was sort of the ultimate moment of that, I think.
Yeah, so let's get to our next category. It's standout plays. We're going to pick, usually we pick one for the offense, one for the defense. Matt, I'm going to jump in here. I'm not actually going to go with any plays while the ball was in play. My pick is for a moment before the ball was even snapped on the field. So with about 7 minutes left in the game, they're just trying to run out the clock basically at this point. They're already up 42-12. It's an insurmountable lead. And then Alabama center Barrett Jones, a just decorated guy who's played multiple positions across the unit, and his quarterback, A.J. McCarron, have a very public disagreement on the snap count. McCarron screams at Jones for the ball. Jones stands up and then shoves A.J. McCarron. It is a wild moment. And like the pair, they hug it out on the field later on when the clock hits 0. They're national champions, and each guy would, in kind of a funny couple of separate moments, they would both insist that they were right. But, Saban discussed the incident during a 60 Minutes interview with Armand Katayan a few years later. He said, quote, "This game's probably won, and they're still trying to get it right," which to me is the kind of pride and performance that you want in the players, end quote. And Matt, to me, I think that moment was the apex of the Saban era at Alabama. I mean, they're dominating a good team in the national title game, and they're angry about execution during garbage time. Like whenever you hear Nick Saban or anyone use the term Bama standard, which, it has always been kind of corny in some ways, but also very true. That to me is the moment that comes to mind, at least in my brain, but it would just never get better. What do you remember about that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually on the field when that happened, so I may not have even been aware of it when it happened, and it may be something that I became aware of when I saw the broadcast later. But I mean, look, it's an astonishing moment. I think it says a lot about the players on that team, and really, it's less shocking, especially after rewatching this game and watching the way AJ is conducting himself for essentially once they get up 28-0. The fact that he is continuing to whip the ball almost too hard when he's passing. You can see there are a few other moments in the game where he is lighting up his teammates a little bit and yelling at people because they're getting too far into the snap count, or somebody didn't get their motion correct pre-snap. Like, it's really not a sort of out of nowhere moment. AJ came into this game deciding that I am going to have my foot on the gas the entire ball game until the final whistle blows. And I think he was fully locked in. I think AJ was on another planet when he was playing this game. And I will say a moment for me, Ben, for me, a similar not play related moment. It's the opening tunnel when actually Manti Te'o has talked about this. If you go and look for interviews with him out there, he's talked about Notre Dame was supposed to come out on the field first because they're technically the home team. And something went wrong. Wires got crossed, and Alabama ends up coming through the tunnel, and they have to hold up Notre Dame for Alabama to walk right in front of them in this tunnel. And you can see it on camera that the Notre Dame players are not. I mean, it would be wrong to say they're scared, but there's a stillness. They are quiet. They are not bringing the same energy to the game. The Alabama players are jumping up and down. They're doing jumping jacks. They're screaming. They are in a different place mentally than Notre Dame was going into.
Well, Mike, before I let you go,
you mentioned it in passing earlier that you have indeed faced off against Alabama. I hate to do this to you, but my listeners would kill me if I didn't ask you at least. Like you were playing for Notre Dame. You faced off against Alabama in that 2012 national championship game. Not a fun night for you and the Irish, I'm sure. But I would love to know, is there any anecdotes or memories or anything that stick out to you about that 2012 Bama team and anything you remember about going up against them?
Yeah, I just think, again, to the point about the preparation and what Alabama players are traditionally associated. In my mind, the neck up. Like, all the guys at Bama are physically talented, some of the best players in the country and all that. But it's sort of like, for years, John Calipari at Kentucky, the way he got these future lottery picks to all buy into their role on the team. No one was going to have as many points as they might have elsewhere. Like, all these Alabama guys really bought into their role in the system. And I remember the most impressive guy to me in that group was C.J. Mosley. He was playing linebacker in that game. And, back then it was the old BCS. So we had 40 days in between the end of the season and the national championship game. And so, you go in and you put some different things in and you window dress some stuff and you have some new checks that are going to try and hopefully have a little bit of the element of surprise on your side. And I just remember everything we had in terms of stuff we wanted to check to or think. CJ had the answers. Like, they were ready. He was getting them in positions. It was like the footage you see of, especially back in the day when it was Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and those guys that did a ton of the gesticulation at the line of scrimmage. And then you'd see Ray Lewis and these other linebackers on the other side going back and forth. That was kind of how it felt, is every time our quarterback was coming up to check, CJ was barking out orders to everybody, and 9 out of 10 times had them in the right spot. And so I really, there was a lot of great players in that team. Clinton Dix in the back end, before we get to the offensive guys over there. But I just thought, for me, playing O-line in that game, I was really impressed at the level of command and control that a guy like CJ had over that defense.
Yeah, it was silly. It really, truly was. So I'll talk about that in a category coming up. But were there, other than the non-play, were there any other plays that stood out to you in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other one, to me, there is we talked about, I mean, it feels over pretty quickly, but definitively, to me, the kill shot is there is a deep pass down the right sideline and it looks like Alabama is setting up for a field goal with time running out in the second quarter. And instead, A.J. McCarron drops back, throws an incredibly accurate ball to Christian Jones. It goes over his right shoulder as he's running out on the right sideline. And it essentially puts them in position where it's becoming apparent they're about to score a touchdown now instead of a field goal. And they do, I think, on the next play, it's a short pass to Eddie Lacy. But that specifically, that throw to Christian Jones, it's an aggressive choice to do that right there. It's them saying, we are not here to kick field goals. We are here to keep scoring touchdowns on these guys. We're not laying up. We're not running the clock out. And it's also just an incredibly thrown ball by AJ and a great catch from Christian Jones. Just a perfect play that goes away from everything else they'd been doing in the first half so far. And it was kind of a preview of the rest of the game, I think, of Alabama saying, we can do this however y'all want to do it. We can keep running it, or we can throw it over your heads to Christian Jones or Amari Cooper or, any of these guys that we have in our stable. Marvin Shin had a catch in this game. That's a name that you probably don't remember if you were not, unless you were a recruiting freak like me back then. But they really spread the ball around in this game.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it was kind of peak of powers for McCarron. And, he'd be a Heisman finalist the next season when he threw the ball 30 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, just an amazing run he had. And like I said, emerging as more than just a game manager, and to follow up what you said about him and just sort of like the intensity that he played with and the competitive character, to use a phrase that Saban would use. I mean, he is just kind of like, I think, the ideal type of competitor, leader, quarterback that Saban wanted running that offense. He knew where everybody was, knew where they needed to be, knew how to run it, limited mistakes. And we've talked about that in the previous episode. But I mean, AJ McCarron, great player to say the least. I thought the kill shot, Matt, was when the Notre Dame place kicker kicked the ball off at the beginning of the game. And then it was over at that moment. It was completely over. Like once the clock started running was the kill shot to me. That's the play, the opening kickoff to me was the play that effectively sealed victory. So
the other somewhat humorous example you could say is it's when Notre Dame didn't get the possession of what looked like a fumbled punt return after their first possession by Alabama, that they really felt like that was going to be a big moment for them. It gets overturned. They say that it was kick catch interference, and Notre Dame fans boo Alabama after every single play on that ensuing offensive drive, all the way down into the end zone. And it was, I think, someone at some point in the broadcast, I think it's Herb Street, says basically like, look, Notre Dame needed a lot of good things to happen for them in this game, and none of them did. And they didn't really even get that many opportunities, but the ones they did get didn't go their way.
Dark way to put it. Matt, let's name the MVP. Who won the game? It's usually a player, can be a coach, can be a broadcaster, someone who went viral, benefited the most from the game in ways we remember the most years later. So who is the MVP, Matt, of the Alabama Notre Dame game, the BCS championship?
I didn't give it to him last time we had a game that involved him. I think I got to go with AJ McCarron. I mean, I will say this is about as good as I ever remember Eddie Lacy looking, just for the record. Yeah. I mean, 20 carries for 140 yards, but I think it's that intensity that he's bringing for the entire game. And I think, look, anybody can kind of have a good half running the ball. But it's relatively easy to adjust to that when you've got 11 defenders. If you want to sell out and stop the run, you can do it. And they weren't able to make a difference in this game because AJ McCarron was also bringing his A game. He is finding guys all over the field. He is finding Amari Cooper on some deep balls. There are so many third down plays in this game where even third and longs, where AJ just has it dialed in perfectly. Not a lot of sitting back there in the pocket, looking around, hoping something might happen. AJ was just running the offense. He knew where his guys were going to be, and he is throwing the ball incredibly hard in this game. And honestly, there's a few drops because of it. But, I mean, you can just sense it. I mean, AJ is really bringing it in this game, and it's one of the best games I think I've ever seen him play.
Great pick. I've got Brent Musburger as the MVP of the game. So you can pick an offensive standout like AJ McCarron or Eddie Lacy if you want. I mean, you can call it Nick Saban's finest moment as the Alabama head coach even. Musburger is the reason I remember the broadcast itself, right? That was just so out of left field.
It really was weird.
It was perfect fodder for Twitter, and this was before social media was really at the peak of its powers in situations like this. I mean, if this had happened in 2025, can you imagine what the night on Twitter and other social media would be like? But I mean, they like I said before, they poked fun at it on late night TV, and it was a star making moment for Catherine Webb. And she appeared on the Today Show after the game. She covered the Super Bowl for Inside Edition. She was in the 2013 Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. She was on a celebrity diving reality show.
She did a Hardee's commercial.
The kicker here, Matt, she even judged the Miss USA pageant. And do you, Matt, remember who publicly invited her to do that?
I mean, I'm going to guess that it's the current president of the United States.
You're correct. Donald Trump publicly invited Catherine Webb to do that. So just an astonishing, not even a footnote, like an actual chapter of this amazing game and broadcast, like I said. All right, Matt, last category, takeaways. What were the consequences of this game? Like, does this game look any different with the benefit of history? Like, what do you walk away with first?
Well, retrospectively, the only thing that's changed is that Notre Dame that season is now technically 0-1 that season. If you look in the NCAA record books, they had their 2012 season wiped away, except of course for the loss. So they are a 0-win, 1-loss team that year. But whatever. In all seriousness, like I said, I think on the Alabama side, like we talked about, it really cemented Alabama's reputation as a dominant program, and I think it created an image that still, to some degree, continues on today. And it will take a lot. It will take a lot for that to go away in people's minds. The other side of this, I think, is what it did with. I think it made people doubt Notre Dame's ability to sort of win the big one. And I think it did a little bit of the same for Brian Kelly. Now, look, Brian Kelly has continued his career. Some would say he moved onward and upward when he got a job at LSU even. And it's not like he's not been successful at all and not won anything. But Brian Kelly, I think, like Notre Dame, the program, also carries with him a little bit of that, can he win the big one, doubt. And I think this is almost the moment you can pinpoint that it began for Brian Kelly. I mean, he had only taken every program he'd ever coached in an upward trajectory up to this point. And this moment really was deflating for his program. They never got back to that stage again. And, I think people have questions about him. I think people have doubts about him. And, when you see the way that he responded to this game, to me, my interpretation of it is that he was saying, if I had better players, we would have won this game.
He's not wrong.
As though
You
that's
just can't
not
say
part
it.
of his job. Yeah.
Right. He's not wrong. You just can't say it. Look, I mean, they got to the playoff, and this was obviously the BCS championship. They got to the semifinals a couple of times, I think 2018 and then 2020, and Alabama got to play them again in that sort of non-Rose Bowl that was played in Dallas during COVID. But
pretty similar result.
Yeah, exactly. And they made it look easy. But in just 3 seasons, Brian Kelly was able to bring Notre Dame back to the national stage. They're playing for their first championship since 1988. I mean, the future looked pretty bright for them, despite what we have been calling this gulf of talent between them and a program like Alabama's. And now it's just so interesting to see that, Kelly left South Bend for Baton Rouge. Marcus Freeman has now taken over, and during his inaugural season, Notre Dame goes 9-4. They go to the Gator Bowl. They beat South Carolina, and then Freeman led them to the college football playoff final, the national championship game last year. So he has more than kept Notre Dame relevant in college in the college football conversation. But this is my takeaways here. At least, like, this gives Nick Saban his 4th national title overall, his 3rd as the Alabama coach. It firmly establishes Alabama as a dynasty, as the best college football program in the country. And for me, this effectively ends any Notre Dame stink or weirdness for Alabama, right? Like, I mean, it's this classic matchup. It's this helmet game. It's the biggest stage of all. And Alabama just beats their brains in a no-doubter. Notre Dame was considered this, and people will remember this, Notre Dame was considered this team of destiny.
That's
Matt,
right.
And people were just picking them to win just because it felt right. I mean, never mind that they barely beat Purdue at home. Never mind that unranked Pittsburgh took them to 3 overtimes. Never mind that they beat BYU by 3 points. So, like, this, Matt, this is just like one of the ultimate, hey, we probably should have known that Alabama was about to annihilate Notre Dame.
A big ball don't lie moment for sure. I mean, I just think, look, it's not fun to some people when it's all chalk, as they say, when the team that it seems like on paper should win is the one that wins definitively. But sometimes you got to have a reality check, and I think that's what happened here.
Yeah, you got to take your medicine. Again, a couple of the key people. McCarron goes on to spend the next 8 seasons as a backup in the NFL, had a couple of chances and did well when he had the opportunity. He joined the new XFL just a few years ago. He was a star on the St. Louis Battlehawks. He He married Catherine Webb in 2014. They have 3 sons now. Brent Musburger left ESPN in 2017 after 3 decades. He went on to do a little play-by-play for the Las Vegas Raiders until 2022. And Kirby Smart hired as the Georgia coach in 2016, just a few years after this. So there are a lot of big players and characters. Manti Te'o goes on, and we saw him in that documentary. He's done a lot of television as an on-air analyst, and the list goes on in terms of like the NFL accomplishments that a lot of these guys were able to have. It was just an incredible game. Again, like you said, if you're an Alabama fan, you loved it. Everybody else probably hated it, but we love boring games here on Beat Everyone. Matt, is there anything else you want to add any other takeaways about this game?
That's all I'm remembering about it right now. Other than I will say I do remember I do remember looking at Urban Meyer on the sidelines as in the final moments of this game, and kind of seeing him shaking his head a little bit, thinking like, "Man, I've really got my work cut out for me to ever get up to this level." Almost like like I used to be on the same level as these guys, but I'm not right now. And of course,
Well,
there was more left in that story, but it was an interesting moment to be witness to.
yeah, he was there 2 years later and took out Alabama in the playoffs. So, like you said, a little bit left in the tank for him. What was the most memorable thing about Miami, Matt? You were there.
Well, I wasn't there as long as I was for some of the other championship game trips, because like I said, I drew the short straw and had to cover the high school All-American game over in Tampa before that. I mean, really, probably my main memory was having to drive a Ford Mustang GT rental car across the Everglades Highway and passing signs that said, "If something happens to your car, do not get out."
Did you request that make and model?
No, I believe it was one of those cases where that I had a sensible car rented, and they were like, "Sorry, we're out of normal cars, so you get this basically Ferris Bueller vehicle.
You get the
drive around."
Florida car. You get the Florida,
right.
we call it around here, the Ford Mustang.
Yeah.
You'll fit right in, man. And then you're a Florida man driving across the Everglades. All right, well, good stuff, Matt. That's number 12 on the list here of Alabama football's 15 best games of the 21st century. Do you agree with our picks? Let us know. You probably don't, but we want to hear from you. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you like to get your podcasts. And our thanks, as always, to our friend and Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalisi, who was there and helped us relive this. Thank you, Matt. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Thank you. We'll see you next time.